Hiring in the AEC and design build world isn't just a challenge, it's a chess match. Career Blueprint is where recruiting unpacks the real strategies behind attracting, hiring, and keeping top talent in one of the most competitive industries in our country. From shrinking talent pools to culture wars and leadership gaps, we will cut through the noise and give employers a clear, actionable game plan. If you build teams that build the world, then this is your blueprint.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Career Blueprint Podcast. I am your host, Patrick Sirmeyer. We are on episode 2. Very excited. If you did tune in last week, I appreciate you being part of the very first one we did create. I had mentioned this prior, and I'll say it again. This has been part of my list of things to put in play for probably 10 months. And I'm very excited to finally get this off the ground. This was kind of the brainchild and part of the thoughts coming from a lot of discussions I had had with clients of ours in the recruiting industry, candidates. And this was most of the idea of like, how do we bring advice to a very specific and unique niche industry? As you know, there's a lot of podcasts out there about recruiting, about hiring, about the job marketplace. Although we will discuss those topics, we are trying to be very more specific to call it our tribe. And our tribe, as you know, from being part of Luxus, if you've seen any of our content and website, we work specifically in the design build industry with employers. So our little pitch is that we've been in business since 2018. We usually work with employers between 10 employees up to about 500, and we're helping mostly owners, leaders who are wearing many hats within their company to help them find that A-level talent. A common phrase you'll hear me say a lot is that we're helping these people find the best talent that's in the market, not on the market. And so I'm excited today, as I interviewed last week, Gary Klein, who's our senior account manager, who has been with us for about 4 years. I'm now with another associate of mine and has become a good friend, Mr. Stephen Hassen. I'll give you a little background before I let Steve talk. But upon coming to join us, he had spent 10 years in recruitment in the agency world. So he had worked for organizations that were servicing employers to help them hire talent. But his specialty happened to come within the clinical healthcare, nursing and therapy, and doing various contract assignments and full-time hiring. Upon joining us, Steve actually had to learn the industry and come to understand a little bit of the nuances that we do in direct hiring within the design build industry. But what he really brought as far as skill set was his knowledge of being able to guide both talent, that's job candidates, and employers on the concept of making that marriage happen for hiring. And there's, a lot to it. We talk about it all the time that if employers, had the time and had the knowledge of being able to help create this successful marriage, they may not need our services, but, we're here to help. And so, Steve, I appreciate you lending your ear and your thoughts, because I am going to pick your brain today. But if you don't mind, I know I gave a little background of who you are and your background, but can you elaborate more maybe of what life is like for the Hassen family, like yourself, as far as you want to go back, maybe to the night you were born, something like that. But, give us some background here.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I really do appreciate it. So giving a little bit of background about myself, initially I was involved. I went to college at the University of Florida. I was definitely an athletics person. I actually ran cross country and track at the University of Florida. And I thought I wanted to get into coaching. I coached at a small Division I school up in North Carolina. And, I decided that really wasn't for me, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I applied to a lot of different positions. I ended up kind of just falling into staffing. I always say that, there aren't too many kids out there, 10, 12-year-olds, who are like, man, someday I really want to grow up and be a recruiter. But I got into that. So I had success with it initially. And I've seen my career basically grow since then. As you mentioned before, I have roughly about, I think, 13 or 14 years of staffing experience, with the first 10 years all being in the healthcare space, mainly in the contract travel healthcare space, initially with therapy, then with nursing. And over the last 2 years or so, I've been with Luxus Build, and I've been doing more perm staffing and working more in the AEC space, the architectural space, the MEP space with engineering, both civil, mechanical, electrical, structural. And, I've been able to grow a lot, learn a lot of the nuances between both perm and contract staffing, as well as the nuances between the kind of candidates you work with in the healthcare space versus the AEC, MEP, or architectural space.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing so much insight. Guys, Steve, if you get to know him at any point, he's a very humble person. And one thing we talk about quite often, although I think he's confirmed it may not still be the record, but there was a point at some point in his young track and field history that he did hold a state record for. What was the event that you held the state record for?
At one point I had the second fastest 2 mile in the state of Florida history ever. I ran 8:52 for 2 miles.
Impressive. I need to look up what the current record is, but oh, that's great. Yeah, I didn't know that coaching was part of your history before. You brought up how most kids don't say, "Hey, I want to grow up and be a recruiter." I totally get that. However, for the first time in my life, I recently was coaching my son's basketball team, and we would have basketball practice here at my house. We just have a big driveway and big enough for the kids can play like half court. One of the kids particularly just noticed I work from home. I think he liked the fact that I had a work from home schedule. I was usually available for practice, and his mom and dad have to go to an office, right? And so he actually specifically asked me what I did for work because he said he wants to grow up and do what I do. And I think not because of my work, but because he would just like the ability to have some flexibility. So kudos to this kid who made me feel good for a second about the idea that someone wants to be a recruiter when they grow up. But anyways, we'll see. I'll let you know in about 10 years if he actually does it. Well, Steve, this podcast can go a lot of directions. And I think I mentioned the fact that we want to guide and give advice to both the employers and the candidates within the marketplace, and maybe recruiters as well. So we'll get into a lot of topics. The open-ended question I did want to lead into was, we're here in Q4 of 2025. We've seen a lot of various changes. I call it, ebbs and flows, ups and downs within the industry of hiring. But if you had to pick out, maybe we'll just start with number one. What's one trending topic or trending situation that you're seeing specifically to the candidates, to the talent that you're working with? Because, I'm not here to boast you up, but you're talking to hundreds of people a week in various markets that you work in. You're interviewing them, you're having conversations, you're getting to see what's important to them right now. Can you give us a little insight as to what you see trending right now?
Yeah. So for me, I think probably one of the biggest trends, and I think this is something that I've noticed kind of throughout my entire career in staffing, but sometimes I notice it more than other times, is that we're working with a lot of candidates that are not necessarily always 100% on the job market. So they're more passive. Maybe they've thought about making a change. Maybe they've considered making a change, but they've never really taken action on it. And, maybe I catch them at the right time. I communicate with them right time. And I start speaking with them. And I think one of the things that it's very easy for people to do is to look at the situation only from their point of view. What's in it for me? I mean, I think that that's kind of human nature. A lot of people are like that. I think that's pretty common, and it makes sense. What's in it for me? What is the benefit to me? What's going to lead to me being successful? And ultimately, in the staffing world, you want to have a mutually beneficial or symbiotic relationship between both the client and the candidate. And I think sometimes, particularly with candidates that are more passive, is they don't realize that, you're trying to also convince the client to be interested in you, while at the same time making sure, hey, this job is a good fit for me. I think it's easy for the candidates sometimes to be like, I want X, Y, and Z. If I don't get X, Y, and Z, then this isn't going to be a viable option for me. And I think it's important to understand that both parties need to be happy. The client needs to feel like they're getting a candidate that has the talent they want, has the skill set they need, and is somebody that's going to join their team and be a good culture fit for them. And the candidate at the same time needs to feel that they're going into a situation that they feel like it's going to be beneficial for them, both on a compensation level, on a career path level, on a growth level, and also for them on a cultural level as well. So, I think a lot of times going into these kind of interviews, going into these kind of communications, if you get to the point where you send your resume over, you get set up for an interview, you speak to the client face to face or via Teams meeting or Zoom meeting, it's important to understand that you're, needing to sell yourself, but at the same time, listening to the client and making sure that, you feel like this is going to be a good fit for you. I think a lot of times candidates can go with the mindset of, well, I want the X, Y, and Z. If they can't do X, Y, and Z, I'm not doing it. Well, if you hear something you don't like, everything in life is a negotiation. You know what I mean? So I think that, if you hear something you don't like, it's important to hold those things. And you always want to have the ball in your court, is the terminology I like to use. So you want to make sure that you feel like the client likes you, the client's interested in you. Maybe you get the offer and you say, hey, this isn't for me. I don't feel like it's a good culture fit. That's completely fine. But it's better to have that ownership or have that ability to make that decision versus just going guns a-blazing and being like, I need X, Y, and Z. I need this. I need this. If you can't do this, then I'm not going to be a good fit for you.
You bring up some good topics. So actually, you made me think about a few things. I'm gonna take a quick shift. So for some great top points you brought up, I'm gonna call this, and I'm gonna go back to, I think I got this from a a certain ESPN show. It's overrated or underrated. Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question. You tell me if this is overrated, underrated, and if you have an opinion. Do you think passive, we call them yellow lights in our business, so passive candidates not active on the market, okay, seem to be happily employed. Do you think those passive candidate individuals should put time and effort into creating a document? Maybe I use an example of like a Google document that references what they believe the next upward step would be for them in their career and defining it in the idea of title, compensation, responsibilities, location, what that looks like, maybe other variables of benefits. Like, should they have that thought through to share with employers and recruiters when they get reached out to about opportunities? Do you think it's an overrated topic or underrated that they have that kind of preset?
No, I mean, I think that's underrated. I would say that, having a good mindset of what you want, what your goals are, is definitely important to understanding, what you want to get out of the conversation. As a recruiter, I mean, it's my job to guide that person. I'm a resource for them. I'm somebody that's supposed to help, make sure they understand, what the next steps are going to look like, what the position looks like, what it's going to take to proceed forward with the role, what's in it, what compensation looks like, what the duties of the role look like. But yes, definitely. I think that being able to structure, what do I want to get out of this interview? What do I want to get out of this conversation? What are the requirements I would need in order to make a change is definitely important. You don't want to go in, with zero knowledge on the company, with zero knowledge on what you want, and essentially wing it, because that's just it's going to show off. It's going to be noticeable. It's going to be something that the client's going to feel. As I mentioned before, I 100% believe that you want to have the power. You want to have the ball in your court. So you don't want to give that perception because you want the client to feel like, hey, this guy is a good fit. And then you can decide, hey, this is a good fit for me or it's not.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll give you another one. I call them seasons of interviews. And here's why I call it seasons of interviews. You're a job candidate. Okay. You've been at your company for 5 years. You have not been seeking a new job for a while. Would you say it's overrated or underrated that a candidate should at least once a year go through a season, that could be a month or 2 months, of interviewing for jobs just to see what the job market looks like for them or what's out there for them? Not to say you have to accept it, but like it's a good idea to understand, what the next step might look for you. You say it's overrated or underrated to go through seasons of interviews as a candidate each year?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely underrated. And there's so many benefits to it. I think that, gaining more knowledge on the industry. You may be at a company that has 25 employees or 30 employees, and they do things a certain way, and that's kind of how they do things, and you're used to that, you're comfortable with it. But going and speaking to other clients allows you to gain knowledge. It allows you to gain different thought processes on how the industry works, different thought processes on how the company works. Maybe there's things you can learn in those interviews or speaking with the client that maybe you didn't think of before. And even if you don't proceed forward with the position, you're gaining that knowledge and you're able to use that, whether it's at your current job or whether eventually you do decide to make a change in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just gonna stick with overrated, underrated for a bit. I got a few more, then we'll move on. I'm kind of liking this path that we're on. I know this one's a hot take for sure. I mean, it could probably be a topic of every podcast we do. And I recognize that I'm gonna preface it by saying that it's easier said than done. But if you're an employer and we know every single conversation we're having with talent is wanting some type of hybrid remote work, do you think the request of hybrid remote work from the candidates, is that an underrated or overrated topic?
I mean, I guess I would say it's an underrated topic, but it's definitely one that requires a lot of tact. Every client, I think, is going to be different. You have some clients who have a lot more flexibility with that kind of thought process. You have other clients who are pretty rigid in what they require. And a lot of times, when we speak to the client like our company does, that's a cultural reason. You know what I mean? They feel like maybe culturally having everyone in the office leads to more success, leads to more drive, leads to better camaraderie within the organization. And I can respect that. I mean, I think that it just depends a lot on the client and how you want to present that. So that just goes back to my original thought process of, I think you eventually need to have that conversation. But it's about how you have the conversation, about how you present the information, and coming up to an agreement that the client feels like they can have success with you in that situation, and you feel like you can have success in that situation as well. So I think making sure that the way that is brought up, the way it's communicated, is definitely an important aspect of it. I think that, just as I mentioned the client, I think the candidates are can sometimes have a different thought process in as well. Some candidates feel like they want that in office. I've spoken to candidates before that feel like it allows them to focus better. There's less distraction. They can have a little bit more success with an in-office environment. But I've also spoke to other candidates that feel like, because of personal reasons, family, their children, they need that flexibility of hybrid. And again, it's how you present that information to clients and how you want to let them know that information is how you're going to ultimately lead to success. If you go in with guns blazing saying, there's no way I'm taking this job unless it's remote, well, how's the client's going to take that? They're not going to take it in a positive way. But if you come in and you explain the why behind it, hey, I've worked remote before. I understand if maybe the first couple of months you want me to be in office, but eventually I would need to transition hybrid. And the reason is because I have children, or, whatever the reason is, you want to make sure you express it that way and feel like the client is comfortable with it and you're comfortable with it as well.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I used to joke earlier in my career, I'd talk about like these pillars of life that we all have. And so, a pillar of life I think is health, being in good health. A pillar of life is good relationships. And I bring these up because I've often said, and I know a little self-serving because we are recruiters, right? But like a pillar of life is your career, being fulfilled in your career and making sure that you enjoy what you do and that you've got a good path. And so I've often said that I think people, if you're younger and you're just in a spot in your life, you're trying to figure out like, okay, how do I really ground myself in with some good guidance, having mentors? I think you should have a spiritual leader of some degree in your life, depending on what that looks like for you. I think you should have a financial planner in your life, someone who's giving you guidance on your finances. I think you should have a personal trainer in your life. And I'm not saying you have to see one every week, but just someone who's giving you the guidance you need in health. And yes, I actually do believe, crazy enough, you should have a really good recruiter who specializes in what you do, who knows your industry, who can give you guidance, who you can call, who you can email, you can text, not just when you need a job, but someone who can just help you along the way. I guess I'll go back to my last question, which is the overrated, underrated. Do you think talent in their whatever industry, we'll just say in ours, should have a really good recruiter relationship of somebody they can pick their brain and get guidance from, even if they're not on the job market?
I think that's probably the most underrated one, in the sense that, this is what you and I do for a living. I mean, we constantly, this is what we do on a day in and day out basis. It's funny because when I get candidates ready for an interview, a lot of times I'll ask the question, well, how many times have you interviewed in the last, 2 or 3 years? And a lot of times their answer is 0. You know what I mean? So they don't have the knowledge or the day in and day out experience that we do. Ultimately, I'm a firm believer in, it's your choice. I never want to talk a candidate into something that they don't feel comfortable with, they don't want to do, that's going to be something that hinders or hurts their career. That's not my mindset. My mindset is a lot more to be a resource for them, to be a guide for them, to give them information about industry trends, to give them information about different clients that maybe they have open positions for, to guide them on what compensation trends look like, and give them the resources and the information. And then my thought process is it's their decision on what they want to do. I will guide them, I'll give them the information, but I never want a candidate to feel like I'm twisting their arm in order to get lined up for a job. That's not my job to do. My job is to give them the information, make them feel comfortable, and then they can make the decision on if they feel like it's what's best for them and what's best for their career and their family. I feel like that's the job of a recruiter. But the biggest thing about a recruiter, that as to why you should have one, is because we're doing it on a day in and day out basis. We see it every single day. We are in communications with hundreds of clients throughout the course of the year, and we are a good resource for them. And I really do think we can add value to their career and help them grow, both financially and also within their specialty.
Dude, great points. I mean, I believe the power of choice is one of the greatest and worst, things we have. It's a great division, knowing that we have that choice. I think about personal trainers all the time. In the topic you just discussed, you see a personal trainer, they can give you, say, your nutrition guide of what you need to do to hit your goals. But, once you leave that trainer, you still have to make those decisions. So to your point being, we'll give guidance, we'll give advice, and we recognize that you have that choice. You may not take the advice we give, but, we want to be here as that resource to help with the employers and the talent as well. I mean, this is, I always use the analogy of the football field. I see two teams and both in their end zones. We're trying to help them meet in the middle. If one party only wants to come 30 yards, the other one's got to go 70. It's a tough situation. Now, currently we're in a scenario, I believe, at least in the marketplace that we're focused in, I'm going to say it's a candidate's market for sure. not 100%, but if you are a licensed individual or a senior individual that is in the middle of your career, I would agree that we're in a candidate driven market where they've got a little more power. But I mean, would you say that's true in your opinion from what you've seen?
I would say that is true to an extent, but there's so many factors that are involved in that. I feel like, some clients we work with have a need that they feel like has to be filled and it needs to be filled quickly. They feel like maybe somebody retired unexpectedly, maybe somebody moved on unexpectedly, and they absolutely need to fill that role. And in that scenario, in my opinion, yes, it's definitely the candidate has a lot more. I don't want to use the word power, but they have a lot more say, I guess, in how things are going to operate. But there's also instances, and I can think about multiple clients we work with as well, that they are kind of more looking for the perfect candidate. They are looking for somebody that fits exactly what they want. That has the license, that has the experience, that has the software skills that is necessary for the job. And, they aren't going to settle for anything less. So it really does depend a lot on the client's needs as to whether it's a candidate's market or not, in my mind, a little bit. But I do think that, to answer your question, I do think that there are definitely an abundance of jobs that candidates can find. It's just finding the right one that's a good fit for them and a good fit for their career.
Yeah, when we look at the hierarchy of we'll call it the desires from the talent who's on the market, right? And I'll paint the picture. So quite often we're doing a search for a company. We source maybe 100 people, and we often tell the employer, hey, believe it or not, out of 100 people, we actually only can present one or two. So we use the factors of like, are they qualified, interested, and available now? So we look at those factors. Now we defined perfect candidate, and then we have to kind of come off and move those margins a little bit and go, okay, no one's perfect, but let's talk about how close we can get. A lot of that's consulting the employer to say, hey, this is the best we're going to get. And what we often find, and I'll bring the top 3 topics up. Okay, we are usually debating and negotiating things like some hybrid remote work. We're debating and negotiating salary or just compensation. And then we're negotiating kind of like current and future responsibilities, we'll just say within the first year. My advice here, and I'm asking you as I say this to give me, kind of a thumbs up, thumbs down approval. My advice to really would be the employers, I would say, in this topic. And it does go to the candidates as well. But my advice would be consider where the gap is and then figure out how do we make a solution that would be a progressive solution within the first year of employment. And what I mean by that is, okay, a person makes 100,000, they want 120. Your budget as the employer is 110. Well, we can get creative with you as the consultants to say, we can help you get to that person to the 120, but maybe not all at once. Maybe it's a progression of, different evaluations at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months in the first year. Maybe it's a scenario where there's a delayed sign-on bonus. Maybe there's a scenario in which you can preset some responsibilities the person must be able to accomplish within the company to do that. Because it's all a matter of just figuring out the checks and balances that gives everyone, the right reasons of why they're deciding to work together. But what I often see happen is there's a presentation of a number. The employer's like, can't do that number. And then everyone's like, well, then we're done. Well, my thought is, to the employer and the candidate, there's still only one person that you liked out of the 100 that's available for you. I think we're probably going to have to be creative on the one person instead of just saying no, because it is unlikely that we find another one within a short period of time. And I guess as I bring that topic up, like, would you agree that employers should be thinking that way? And do you have anything else you want to elaborate on that topic?
No, I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think that, as you mentioned, we go through hundreds and hundreds of candidates. It's our job. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we do day in and day out is we are constantly sourcing clients, sourcing candidates, trying to find the perfect fit for our clients. And when we present someone over to the client, we're not doing it to waste their time because ultimately it's a waste of our time as well. You know what I mean? Like we want to get them set up with somebody who we feel like is a good fit for them, who's going to be a good fit for their company. And, if they hit every mark, then we're ecstatic. If there's maybe 1 or 2 marks that is kind of a gray area, well, I think it's always worth a conversation to have with the client and the candidate to see, hey, is this a good fit? As I talked about before, both sides need to be happy. So it's one of those things where the way you can really get that kind of determination or that kind of decision is with the conversations. If I feel like if they're close, I think if I would recommend clients to speak to the candidate, they can always say no, but I think that there's just not that many candidates out there that are the perfect fit. And when we do send one over, it's because we think that they could be a viable option.
Yeah, good points. Well, look, I wanted to keep this a short podcast. We've got work to get back to for sure today, but you bring some really good insight. I just like the topics we're discussing. I'm hoping to those who will listen, that it'll enlighten, some thoughts on their part and cause some greater conversations. I am going to put my plug in for those listening. We would love the opportunity to interview you if you are, within our industry. I keep bringing that up. We're in the design build industry. We love talking to, talent that's in this industry and employers. We want to be able to help bridge this gap and make sure that we're making a stronger relationship for both parties and bringing up really good topics. And Steve, you've got a lot of good insight. I recognize that, look, in the recruiting world, I don't think recruiters have a great reputation in general. I think a lot of people go, why would I work with a recruiter? And they've had plenty of bad experiences. I can't tell you guys enough how many times we've obtained new clients from bad experiences they've had with other recruiting organizations. It's the nature of how it is. But, we want to do our very best to be a credible source. And so, Steve, I really appreciate you lending your time and your ear to me today.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.